Justin Simien is creator and showrunner of Netflix's Dear White People, which is about Black students at a primarily white Ivy League college. The show premiered its third season in August 2019, but suffice it to say, it's having a moment right now, though under not the best of circumstances, given police brutality and, of course, the pandemic. So what have you been thinking about just people suddenly discovering this show at this particular time or revisiting the show right now?
Man, it's a complicated mix of emotions, I gotta say. You know, on one hand, when things like this happen, when I say things like this, I mean specifically the very public murder of a Black person by the hands of the police, which unfortunately is a recurring, regular event. You know, as a Black man, as a Black artist, I feel really helpless. I feel like all of the protesting and the donating and the sort of social media posting I can do doesn't make a difference. But to feel like I've poured my heart and my time and my passion and my blood, sweat, and tears into something that is meeting the cultural moment is validating. On the other hand, you know, there's a sadness that what we've been talking about really since 2014 with the film, and 2016 with the show specifically, you know, unfortunately is an evergreen topic. And you know, the point of Dear White People really has always been about the ways in which racism can kind of just sort of hide in plain view, because people sort of assume, oh, this issue was taken care of long ago, or the Dear White People that the show is addressing can't possibly be me, or you know, they're going to say something aggressive or mean that's going to hurt my feelings. And you know, that sort of rejection of what a Black person's experience is really has always been the thing that gets in the way of people really seeing our humanity. And you know, Dear White People is many things, but it is a call for everyone to see our humanity. So I'm proud that people are seeing that, but it's also frustrating that it takes so long to get people's attention.
Yeah, and responses to you know, George Floyd's death, Breonna Taylor's death, all of that has taken so many different forms, some for better, some for worse. You know, Dear White People, you know, did that parody of the "I Take Responsibility" video that went online. That was so great and so like on point. Like, how fast did that come together, and what were your thoughts going into putting that together?
Well, I blame my writer's room because they're all really brilliant, shady individuals, and we were writing the season on, you know, Zoom during the lockdown, and we keep our sort of group thread open, our chat thread. And as with anything racial or funny or just whatever, it ends up in that chat thread, and we were all just kind of watching the "I Take Responsibility" video and just kind of quietly cringing. And I know that the people involved I don't think that they understood like how it would be received, and I know there's a lot of good intentions there, but the Dear White People's writers room, I mean, they had jokes and they were funny, and we sort of came up with this idea in our chat thread of like, oh my God, we should have the white students of Winchester awkwardly apologizing about racism, but actually making it about them and how great and magnanimous they are. And we texted, I mean, everyone's sitting at home, so we just texted, you know, some of the white cast members to see if they'd be down. They said yes. And by the end of the day, we had that video.
As for the most recent season itself, season 3 kind of represented a shakeup of the show, a bit of a loosening of the structure, bringing in sort of expanding this ensemble to look at more of the different characters in it. What were your thoughts about that, and you know, the whole killing the narrator idea of kind of restructuring season 3 in that way?
Well, I felt like the show really was about personal revolution. These are characters that have been constrained by their identities, either the ones they invented or the ones that were thrust upon them. And I wanted to have a kind of visceral artistic representation of what that feels like, the uncertainty, the fear that happens when you start to branch out and try aspects of yourself that you've never really considered before. And so, you know, like jazz music, all of the characters and their concerns feel like these very disparate solos that have nothing to do with each other, especially at the season's beginning. You're kind of waiting to see how all of these plot lines are going to necessarily line up. But just like jazz music celebrates the individual by putting individuals in a group context really so does season 3. It says, yes, these movements, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, you know, people's personal ambitions, all of these things can fit together and they can make a harmony. And so that was part of the reasoning. And also just because, you know, this rule that a TV show has to sort of stay the same over its lifespan, it's one of those arbitrary rules that someone came up with one day that fit a model of TV that we're no longer in. And I guess maybe that's just me coming from the movie world, but I love rebooting the show every year. I love that each season kind of operates as its own sort of, you know, movie.
And I really like the characters, like that the characters are still evolving. Of course, it's, you know, it seems like a drastic shift for some of them, you know, Sam quitting, you know, the radio show, for instance. But of course, if you think of any of us in college, you know, we weren't fully formed, you know, consistent characterizations of ourselves, you know, as we were finding ourselves. And in this case, Sam was also kind of finding herself as an artist and filmmaker herself. Did any of kind of your experiences kind of coming up as an artist inspire like her work and her journey towards finding her own voice?
I would say so. I mean, in this season, Sam meets one of her heroes. She meets one of the filmmakers that inspired her to go in the path that she's going. She also meets one of her sort of public nemesis. So she meets two filmmakers, one of which is played by me in the season, but a filmmaker that sort of represents everything that she doesn't want to be as a filmmaker, and a filmmaker that represents everything that she does want to be. And when she meets the filmmaker that she's been sort of venerating in her mind, you know, it's not the best interaction. There's a lot of jealousy and wounds from the past and sort of crabs in a barrel kind of infighting. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where like she met her hero and it really deflates her. But then she meets this guy who she thinks of as her enemy and actually realizes that the two of them have something in common that she didn't expect. And I would definitely say that that is some stuff from Justin Simien's personal diary in terms of who those people are and what the situations are. You know, it's been mentioned in past interviews and stuff, and there's no reason to dredge it up again here. But certainly, you know, the motif of meeting one's heroes but not being met by them comes up a lot in season 3.
Yeah, and you taking on that role of sort of her nemesis, filmmaker. You know, what made you decide to play that role? Was that always something that you wanted to do, or had you considered casting another actor for that?
Well, it really came out of a conversation specifically with Tyler Perry, and I felt like, especially for my audience and for the kind of work that I do, I don't know, I just felt like Tyler was unfairly being targeted as an enemy, when in fact the problem was a system that decides that there can only be so many Black voices. And I frankly wanted my audience to see him differently and appreciate the ways in which he's contributing to Black culture and to culture as a whole. And I felt like, you know, he couldn't actually play the character himself. He got really busy. And I felt like if I played the character, I could make sure that it wasn't like parody. I could make sure that there was humanity in the character. And, you know, I understood who I was as a storyteller going to performing arts high school in Houston. So acting really is how I learned to be a director in every practical sense. And so I was just sort of reading the part in our table reads. And it just felt like the most respectful choice was to just play him myself. You know, I think Yvette Lee Bowser, my co-showrunner in the room, just sort of turned to me and when we realized Tyler couldn't do it, and they were just like, Justin, you should just play him. You should just do it. And so, you know, that's what I did. It was a lot of fun.
And as you mentioned, a lot of the season was about sort of taking your heroes, your imagined heroes, kind of off their pedestal. Reggie also has to do that with Moses, played by Blair Underwood. I feel like one of the lessons I've taken from like the post Me Too movement, Weinstein, like that whole, like all of that is sort of to kill the genius, where like you can admire someone, you could love their work, but like the way I've started to see it is never put someone on a pedestal so high you can't take them down if you need to.
Right.
Like what made you want to explore that from both of those ends, both, you know, Sam's experience in terms of filmmaking and Reggie's experience with this person he admires who's also kind of a predator?
Yeah. Well, I think that one, I wanted to talk about the heartbreak of that because, you know, it's called projection, and it's a psychological term. We've been studying it for hundreds of years. We project our best qualities onto other people before we realize that we actually have the fortitude to hold them in ourselves. And we also project our worst qualities onto people before we have the guts to admit that we are describing ourselves as well. And for Black folks, because all of society tells us what we can and can't be, we sort of have to project our best onto these sort of singular heroes who can't possibly live up to, you know, our best ideas of ourselves. And when those people are sort of publicly outed or shamed or end up doing something that's despicable, the loss for a Black person is very deep and it's personal. You know, when Moses is sort of accused of the things he's accused of in the season, Reggie can't believe it, because that means that the only reason Reggie has to think that he's worth something no longer exists for him. And so I wanted to really get into that from a Black perspective of just sort of, you know, the way the intersection of the Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movements in particular, the way that hits Black people and the way that hits Black communities is singular and different. And as with a lot of things that Dear White People covers, I don't think that's an aspect that necessarily is being factored in or talked about or discussed very much. And I think it's why we have so much trouble in the Black community sort of calling out these heroes that have let us down in some ways, because we need them and we depend on them in ways that's different than other folks. And I just wanted to shed some light on that and maybe help us have a better, more thorough conversation about these things.
And another new element in season 3 that I especially appreciated was the introduction of Deontay, who's played by Griffin Matthews. I think we all needed Deontay in our lives.
Yes.
You know, what made you want to introduce that character, and you know, what was casting that character like, and making him such an important part of the season?
Deontay is in my heart and soul. You know, I needed a Deontay. Deontay is this beautiful person that came into my life in high school, and you know, unlike me, he sort of didn't. Everyone knew he was gay. I mean, he didn't have a choice. He sort of presented very effeminate, very loud, very over the top, and in a lot of the way, in a lot of very specific ways, he showed me how to be a gay man and how to incorporate my being gay into my identity, because you know the show is always about identity and self. We're always going back to that particular theme, and you know, especially in high school, a lot of people just sort of assumed I was straight, and I just let them assume that. And he showed me, no, this is how you put yourself into your identity. And he passed away some years ago, and I've always been looking to put his spirit into my work, and particularly with Dear White People, because Lionel is still in the process of, you know, he comes out in season 1, but he's still dipping his toe into, you know, incorporating his gayness, his gay self into his public identity. And I just wanted to rip the Band-Aid off. And it would be ridiculous if Lionel sort of just completely was a different person. So I thought, wow, why don't we bring a character into his life, almost like a Svengali, almost like an older brother figure, to really just sort of like throw Lionel into the deep end of the gay pool. And one of the most amazing things that came out of that was Griffin Matthews joining the cast. He plays Deontay. He actually auditioned for Lionel for the film. And I remember being very impressed with him then. But oh boy, him playing Deontay, it's like a revelation. I mean, every scene he's in, you just, I don't know, you just feel the screen light up. He really is a very gifted actor. He's also, you know, he wrote that open letter, the Dear White Theater, that's sort of starting this kind of revolution on Broadway. So he's also an activist and a father, and just a really amazing human being that I'm just so grateful he came back and decided to mess with us again after, you know, we gave the part to someone else with the movie, because he's just so wonderful as Deontay.
And at the end of the season, you have this sort of flip the script, Dear Black People sequence at the start of the episode that ties into what everyone's going through with Moses and that whole storyline. What was it like filming that, conceiving that, shooting that? You know, it's funny, but also very pointed in very specific ways.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, since I made the movie, since before the movie, since it was just when it was a Twitter account. What if there was a Dear Black People? You know, that's sort of like a very easy retort. The presumption being that Dear White People is somehow, you know, just this sort of unedited rant against white people or something, which it is not. But I wanted to actually take that question, what if there was a Dear Black People, to its extreme, because the thing that racism function, one of the ways that racism functions is that it just keeps us from seeing things the way they actually are, because we have all of these assumptions in our head about what black and white means. And when you flip the script, and you know, in Dear Black People, which is really just the first few minutes of the last episode, and I don't want to give anything away if people haven't seen the finale yet, but there's a reason behind it. But basically, like, by just literally turning everything on its head, making black people sort of the people in power in this alternate reality, and white people the subjugated race. And Sam White, who is interracial, is still caught between them, but she sort of is leaning towards the side of white people in this reality. I think it sort of reveals a lot of things and makes obvious a lot of things that people seem to really struggle with just sort of seeing in this reality. Things such as like how crazy it is that we elected a sociopathic reality television star as our president. Things like, you know, when white people sort of regularly appropriate the language of victimhood and of racism and turn it on themselves as if they are the victims. It sort of just, it sort of makes the contradictions that should be really obvious in our reality glaringly obvious in the world of the show. And also as a director, I wanted to parody myself a bit. You know, the way Dear Black People shot is very peak Dear White People. I mean, and I as a filmmaker, there's something I wanted to show. I wanted to kind of pay homage to myself, but also kind of really be very strictly adherent to the style in which I directed the film and the first season. And also then kind of chart how my style as a director and what my interests are in terms of what I emphasize in the scene has changed, you know, since I began in 2014. So for those reasons, it was just a lot of fun. It felt like an idea that would get us into a lot of trouble. And typically those are the ideas we tend to go with over at Dear White People.
You mentioned that season 4 writing of that is underway on Zoom under these strange circumstances. And speaking of these strange circumstances,
yes.
has current events, you know, because the show isn't like topical per se, that's from the headline, but have current events kind of affected where you kind of want to go with season 4, or changed any directions you were planning to go in that you can talk about? Of course, no specifics, of course.
It's actually just reinforced where we were going. I mean, even with season 1, you know, in the show Bible, which, you know, was written before we started writing, I allude to the potential of a Trump presidency. We're always sort of, you know, it isn't a show that's like ripped from the headlines in the way that, say, like, you know, a procedural is, but we are very much studying, you know, whatever's going on in politics in America, in the world. We're studying the climate of the country, and we are making a commentary on those dynamics. And it tends to produce many moments that are, you know, too much to go into in this interview, where we sort of predict something in a hypothetical sense that actually happens by the time the show either comes out or after the show has come out. And similarly, we did that here. It was season 4, to my surprise and astonishment, because we actually finished writing the season before the Black Lives Matter led protests over George Floyd's murder really kind of swept the globe. We wrote it before that happened, and yet in so many ways this season really comments on the moment that we are in right now, from a Black point of view, which, you know, tends to be a point of view that is underrepresented even now. So I'm really proud of that, and I'm really proud that, again, we've written something that I think will meet the cultural moment, you know, whenever we're sort of able to get out of lockdown and shoot the thing.
Well, I look forward to that eagerly, and I want to congratulate you on season 3 and the renewed attention that is on the whole series,
Thank you.
despite the circumstances that have happened to come in. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you always for really good to talk to you. And I hope you're well, sir.
Yes, as well as can be, yeah. Under the circumstances.
I get that. All right, man. I'll see you around, I hope.
All right, see you.